undergraduates, graduate, postdoc faculty, or professionals. Importantly, the dues that are paid to the regional chapter are not something that goes to ICA headquarters. This is your funds that you use. There is no connection, no fiscal connection between your chapter and the dues that you are able to receive and those that might be separate from ICA. So this is a very important and we think a very exciting and unique part of the chapters in each particular place. So we've talked about the different activities that you have done. And so I'm just very thrilled here to be able to say that we introduce ICA Indonesia. We will hear more details about that in the rest of the session here today. I just want to take this opportunity again to thank all of you, many of you in the organizing committee, those in the audience who have chosen to come here. I'm seeing that we have a very large number of people, over 325 at this moment, who have joined online on Zoom for this particular event. It truly is a historic event. I'm very grateful to all of you for being here. And I just want to end this particular thing by thanking all of you. I'm sure I'm not going to be able to pronounce thank you very much, but it's on the screen. And I want to be very grateful to every single one of you who has helped to make it possible for us to come today to create this first ever chapter of ICA Indonesia. Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor Noshir, Constructor, for the second speech. Well, now is inauguration ceremony ICA Indonesia and continue with certificate signing. Please welcome again Professor Noshir, Constructor, as the President, International Communication Association. I will request Honorable Communication Science Head of Study Program, Professor Dorin Kartikawangi, to come to the stage for inauguration and certificate signing of the ICA Indonesia. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big applause for the launching of ICA Indonesia for the first time it was founded. Welcome to the Grove of the Guide. Okay, wait a minute. And I request Honorable Administrator come to the stage and please committee to highlight if they are coming in the Zoom. For our advisory board, the first is Professor Dr. Auris Anugroho. The second is Professor Dr. Bilika Sarwono, Professor Gati Gayatri, Professor Dr. Atwar Bojari, Professor Dr. Hafid Changara, Professor Alo Liliwari, Professor Dr. Muhammad Khairil, Dr. Iskandar Zulkarnain, and the last is Satyo Budi Hendro Hutomo, MSE. Please come to the stage. Repeat again, please. Advisory board. The first is Professor Dr. Auris Anugroho, Professor Dr. Bilika Sarwono, Professor Gati Gayatri, Professor Dr. Atwar Bojari, Professor Dr. Hafid Changara, Professor Alo Wiwawari, Professor Dr. Muhammad Khairil, Dr. Iskandar Zulkarnain, and the last is Mr. Satyo Budi Hendro Hutomo, MSE. Welcome for the Grove of the Guide. Okay, wait to the stage. And I call Executive Committee. For the chair is Professor Dr. Doreen Kartikawangi. For the vice chair, okay, for the photographer, can you guide again? For the executive committee is Professor Doreen Kartikawangi, Dr. Hasyario MSE, Dr. Irwa Rohimah Zarkazi, and Dr. Nia Sarinastiti. Welcome to the stage. And if they are coming in a Zoom, please committee to highlight. For the next is organizing committee. Please welcome Loina Lalolo Krina Paranginangin, MSE, for the lead. For the secretariat, Dr. Fajar Junaidi, and the last is Nuni Indra Pratiwi, Esos and Ecom. For the membership is Stefanus Andriano, MSE, and the last is Alfonso Harrison, MSE. For the event management is Yuri Nugraini, MSE, Dr. Satria Kusuma, MSE, and the last is Dr. Levian Jacqueline Heralopoulos, Esos and Ecom. For the digital and social media, Benedictus Avianto Nugroho, MSE, Aditya Utama Ambus, practitioner, and the last is Eltris Natalia, MSE. And the last administrator is publication, Dr. Sarwititi Saru Prasojo, Natalia Widyasari, MSE, and the last is Dr. Nahria Esos, MSE. Please photographer to guide. Okay, now is a photo session.
Yeah.
Please stay in the stage. And I will request Honorable Dean of Faculty Administration Business and Communication Science to come to the stage to photo session. Welcome, photographer. Okay, wait a minute. Miss Lena is come to with us. Please welcome Miss Lena for photo session. Well, now is giving a certificate. Please, Professor Noshir, to give a certificate, please. While Professor Nashir is giving certificate, please photographer to guide.
For the first, I would like to call Professor Gati Gayatri. Foto ya dengan sertifikatnya, yes. Professor Hafid Changara is in the Zoom. Can you officially? Yeah, yeah. He is up there. Okay, and then Professor Alois Agus Nugroho, still in the class. Okay, yeah. Professor Dr. Atwar Bajari, Professor Atwar Bajari in the Zoom, yeah. He actually who invite you for his inaugural tomorrow, yeah. Okay. And then Prof. Alo Liliwari is not in the Zoom. Profesor Dr. Muhammad Khairil. Mbak diam sini. Dr. Iskandar Zulkarnain. Mr. Setya Budi Hendro Utomo. Mas.
Next, Profesor Dr. Dorin Kartika Wangi.
Dr. Hascaryo. Dr. Irwa Rohimah Sarkasi. Dr. Nia Sarinastiti. Please get ready, Ibu Loina. Ibu Loina Krina Paranginangin. Dr. Fajar Junaidi. Ibu Nuning Indah Pratiwi. Ibu Nuning is Mr. Stefanus Andriano. Mr. Alfonso Harrison. Miss Yuli Nugraheni is on. Dr. Satria Kusuma. Dr. Leviani Jacqueline is not in the Zoom. Dr. Leviani Jacqueline. Mr. Benedictus Avianto Nugroho. Mr. Ingurah Aditya Utama. Miss Elkris Natalia. Dr. Sarwititi Sarwo Prasojo. Miss Natalia Widyasari. Oh, here she is. Leviani Jacqueline Lotulung. Just a moment, Ibu Leviani. She is in the Zoom. Hello, Bu. Dr. Nahria. Dr. Nahria, is she in the Zoom?
Yes, I'm in the
Mhm.
Zoom.
Profesor Dr. Billy Sarwono. Oh yeah,
Miss
sorry.
Naya is
Yeah,
in the Zoom.
Dr.
Oh,
Nahria
Mau
is.
bikin perjaringan Sarah.
Hi, Bu.
Bicara.
Okay, so that is the last. Thank you so much, Prof. Nasir. We can continue to the next.
Thank you so much, Professor Dorin Kartikawangi, and thank you so much, Professor Nasir. Please take a seat again, all participants. Well, ladies and gentlemen, ICA has a social media. The name is official.ica.id. You can follow it to get membership information and other information you can see in the screen. For the social media ICA, please commit it to share screen. ICA has a social media. The name is official.ica.id. You can follow it to get membership information and other information. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now we are going to listen general lecture from Professor Nasir Contractor about people analytic using digital exhaust from the web to leverage network insight in the algorithmically infused workplace. But there is to guide or to introduce. Mr. Avianto Nugroho Putro, more than 20 years of experience in public relation industry. During his tenure in PR agency, he was involved in PR campaigns for corporates and FMCG brands, as well as issue and crisis management. Passion in creative thinking and working with people, has developed skills in public relations, marketing communications, and media management. For education, bachelor degree in mass communication 11 Maret University, digital software system course, CMC Limited, New Delhi, India, and master degree in corporate communication management, Indonesia University. He is near us. Please welcome Mr. Alfianto Nugroho Putro. Let's give a big applause.
Good morning, everyone who's joining offline here, and also our friends who's joining through Zooms. Good morning. It's very exciting today that we can have Professor Nasir to give a general lecture. So without further ado, please welcome Professor Nasir to the stage. I would like also to read some of biography about the professors. Professor Nasir Contractor is the Jane S. and William J. White Professor of Behavioral Sciences at the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science, the School of Communication and Kellogg School of Management, and Director of the Science of Networks in Communities, SONIC, Research Group at at Northwestern University. He is also the president of the International Communication Association, ICA. So today, professors will deliver it's more about the people analytics, using digital exhaust from the web to leverage network insights in the algorithmically infused workplace. It's kind of intriguing title and also quite complicated, but I believe it's also quite current in the communication science. So let's hear directly from Professor Noshir. So Professor, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Let me see if I can get my shared screen. Excellent. Okay, so I'll try to keep this brief. I know there's a lot of excitement that I can feel in the room about this new chapter, and I failed to mention this initially, but I wanted to mention this now, that in addition to thanking all of you, I've had a chance to talk to many of you as you've been planning this, and to members of the organizing committee. We've had Zoom sessions and so on. And I truly believe that you all have been, that Prof. Dorian has put together a real dream team to be able to make all of these activities come so well together. So again, another round of applause to the dream team, ICA Indonesia, and what you've done out here. I should also mention that even though I have now lived in the United States since I went to go to graduate school there, I originally come from India, so not very far from here. And one of the first times that I first was impressed and intrigued by Indonesia was when in history we learned that the non-aligned movement, that President Sukarno from Indonesia was one of the leaders, along with Prime Minister Nehru and several others, in creating this non-aligned movement. And so for a long time, India and Indonesia have been longtime partners and friends in helping to give a voice to what we today call the Global South. And I think it is only appropriate that Indonesia is amongst the leading countries today at the vanguard of continuing to give voice to the Global South in the context of the International Communication Association. Okay, so let's spend the next few minutes talking about something that is much more directly tied to my own research right now, and that is the concept of people analytics. Let me do a quick show of hands. How many of you had heard the phrase people analytics before reading this very long title? Maybe one or two people, not even that, just a couple of people. Not surprising. I thought that would be the case. This is why I wanted to mention this. So what I want to talk today a little bit is about what this concept means and what we as communication scholars can contribute to understanding what the concept means and how it can help us in society at large, and also recognize that there are lots of ethical issues associated with this. So the idea of people analytics started, like many other things today, in the high-tech industry. And back this was in 2015, an article that said the geeks have arrived in HR. People analytics is here. And I like this opening sentence, which says the old-fashioned fuddy-duddy HR department is changing. The geeks have arrived. So in other words, it's a commentary about how we have been taken over by a group of people who are doing more quantitative kind of approaches to studying this kind of issue. The same idea was shown in this article where it said how Google is using people analytics to completely reinvent HR or human resource effort. This was an article that was written in the New York Times. What did Google learn from its quest to build the perfect team? And they spent 2 years studying 180 teams. And what they found was that the most successful teams at Google shared 5 traits. That is, the people in the team had certain qualities, the secrets to success. Number 1 on that list was psychological safety. So if an individual feels psychologically safe in order to be able to make comments, in order to be not feel that they are going to be blamed if something goes wrong, to speak openly, those are the kinds of teams that are likely to be the most successful. While this was obviously very important, What we noticed also as we went along is that all of these traits were individual level traits. That means they were not taking into account the networks in which we are embedded. More about that in a minute. But as we continue through looking at the hype around creation of people analytics, McKinsey published this report in 2015, which said power to the new people analytics. Another report that came out from Deloitte said people analytics, recalculating the route. This was published in 2017, not that long ago. But what they also found that was somewhat troubling is that only 9% of the people they interviewed said that they have a good understanding of what people analytics can tell us about which talent dimensions drive performance. So we were beginning to see that even though there was a lot of excitement around the idea of people analytics, what people were able to actually use it for was very limited. We didn't have much of an understanding. Excuse me. Another report that came out in 2017 was published by Tata Consultancy Services, and they too titled their report as HR Analytics, no longer just a buzzword. That was the good news. The bad news is that they found that only less than 5% of big data investments go to HR. So even today, when we live in the age of big data and people are talking about big data analytics in a lot of different parts of our world, the amount that was actually going to HR, to people analytics, was very, very small. So take into account the fact that 9% of people feel that they know what people analytics can help them understand, and less than 5% of investment is being made in this area. And that led us to believe that there was some room to improve people analytics. And as a result, my colleague Paul Leonardi and I published an article in Harvard Business Review that we titled, this was in 2018, and we titled this article, Better People Analytics, implying that we should focus not just on who they are, but on who they know. So the idea here was to begin to bring into analytics not just individual qualities of the individuals, of the people, but also their networks, so their relationships with other people. And so we began to, in this article, suggest how we could be studying these different kinds of networks, and how does the networks that a person is involved in, how can that tell us more about the likelihood of someone succeeding? And the metaphors that we were using here come from a lot of different fields. If you look at this picture, this is a picture of the brain. On the left-hand side is a microscope picture of the MRI of what it looks like, what is the picture of a healthy brain. On the right-hand side is the image of a brain of a person afflicted with schizophrenia. And you can see that as you look at these, there are different patterns associated with this. We argue in this article that the same thing is true at networks. The difference is that unlike the brain, where we may look at microscopic ways of going into it, in the case of network, we need a macroscope, not a microscope. In other words, we need to zoom out to look for certain patterns. And if you look at a picture like this doesn't give you much because it is so detailed, it's so zoomed in. But as you zoom out, what you see is that this is in fact a pointillist image of what you can see from a painting by Matisse. And we say the same kind of logic applies in networks. As you zoom out, you see the forest more than the trees. You begin to see certain kinds of patterns. We call those patterns as structural signatures. And what that means is that as we look at networks in which we are embedded, we can begin to identify whether a person is able to do certain kinds of activities exactly not because of who they are, but because of their networks. And in the article, we talked about 6 examples of these structural signatures. The first 2 here on the left, on the top, the first one is called the ideation signature. The ideation signature says, based on a person's position in the network, depending on who they know, we can make a prediction of how likely it is that this person will come up with good ideas. And in this case here, the purple node that you see is going to be very likely to come up with good ideas. Why? Because the purple node is connected to a lot of other nodes, but nodes that are not connected to each other. Notice that everyone that these purple nodes, most of the people that the purple node knows are not connected to one another. That means the purple node has the ability to take one slice of idea from one person, a different portion of an idea from another person, likewise from a third person, and is uniquely positioned to combine these to come up with a brand new idea. The second signature that we talk about is called the influence signature. The influence signature says, how likely is a person to be influential in convincing others in their network about a particular attitude or a particular behavior? We argue that this person is very influential, and you might be surprised because you might say this person only has 2 links. Why would that make this person influential? What we know from the science of networks is that a person is influential not just based on the number of links they have, but the number of links that their links have and the number of links that those links have. So this is very similar to what Google uses when it sorts the search results when you put a query. When you look at when you type something into Google and it gives you the top website, that top website is not the one that is relevant to your search that only has many links coming to it. In fact, that website is ranked on the top because it has many links coming to it from websites that have many links coming to those websites, from websites that have many links coming to those websites. This definition is what we call in Google as PageRank algorithm, is in network science sometimes referred to as the eigenvector centrality or the prestige centrality. So this is what makes this node so influential. The first 2 signatures have to do with individuals. The next signature I'm going to focus on is the signature of a team. What makes a team efficient in getting things done? We can look here that we know from network science that since these purple nodes all have a lot of connections to each other, this team will work well together. And like the organizing committees of the ICA Indonesia chapter, you will be efficient in making sure that we were able to set up this kickoff meeting at such short notice. You're very efficient. But not only are you efficient, because the next signature we're going to look at is called the innovation signature. What makes a team not just efficient, but also innovative? What makes a team innovative is not the connections inside the team, but the connections that different team members have with many other people outside. And so if you think of this as the dream team of the Indonesia chapter organizing committee, each member in this particular organizing committee has lots of connections to people outside at their respective universities, in their respective organizations. And many of those are not overlapping. So what makes this organizing committee of the ICA Indonesia chapter innovative is that the members in this committee have unique contacts outside this committee that they can go to for advice, that they can listen to for guidance, that they can spread the word and evangelize for. And as a result, this particular network is going to have a high innovation signature. The last 2 that we have here are called the silo signatures, and it's at the organizational level. The silo signature is something we're all familiar with, whether it is at universities or in organizations. We know that we have a tendency to focus in our own departments. We live in silos. Sometimes that, to some extent, that could be a good thing, but other ways it becomes bad because we don't have a lot of connections. In networks, we have a way of measuring the extent to which organizations are siloed. We call that the modularity index. And in this case, you can see that this organization obviously is very siloed because they have many more connections inside their group than between the groups. The last one here is called the vulnerability signature. And this came from work that I did when I was studying a well-known US consumer products company called Procter & Gamble. And one of the things I was working with folks there was in a smaller network within P&G that was looking at how to develop new ideas in the area of packaging, because a lot of products that the P&G makes are packaged. And so I was working with some colleagues in that area. And as we mapped the networks of people within P&G and their connections and their networks outside P&G, we found an interesting example of a supplier of P&G that had connections to many people within P&G, but the people who they were connected to within P&G were not talking to each other. What does that mean? It means that this supplier on the outside could be having multiple conversations with people inside P&G, charging them, triple billing them, quadruple billing them, and they would never know inside P&G. And that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario would be if this supplier on the outside was taking ideas from different groups within P&G, combining it, and coming up with a competitive product that would make P&G vulnerable to the outside supplier. And that's why we call this the vulnerability signature. Now, all of what I have said to you is something that the field of communication networks, of social networks, has known about for quite a long time. So the question is, why are we not using it? Why is it that even as I say to you that we published this article in HBR and Harvard Business Review, I'm saying it was not novel. So what is different now? Well, part of what that difference is to understand one of the reasons why these insights have not been used in people analytics. The problem has been surveys. I don't know about you. Sorry. Sure. Which one? The golden nodes? No, we just use that for different colors. Sorry about that. Yes, no, the question was, what are the golden nodes? And we just chose golden nodes. In one case, yeah, the golden nodes are not likely to come up with good ideas because they're talking to others who are all connected to each other. And the same thing is true here. This golden node, in the case of influence, is connected to a lot of nodes, but the nodes that it's connected to are not in turn connected to a lot of nodes. And as a result, they are not going to have high influence, even though they have many links. But other than that, there's no more significance on that one. So if you go to surveys, I don't know about you, but I'm going to make a chilling true confession. I hate answering surveys. I try to avoid answering surveys. I suspect some of you are the same way. And yet we as researchers are constantly asking people to answer surveys. And we find then that many people are like us. They find surveys time consuming. They find them they elicit low response rates, and they are also rapidly obsolete. So people are going to be answering a survey, and then after a period of time, their networks will change. So what if we could have surveys at minimal cost with 100% response rate, and that get updated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Well, this might seem like fiction, but in fact, today we have the opportunity to explore this piece of fiction. And the way we explore it is by seeing if we could use all the digital trace data, the digital exhaust that we are generating by the use of platforms like Zoom, like things like Microsoft Teams, like Slack. Are we able to see and get a good picture of what our networks look like by simply looking at these digital trace, or what is sometimes called digital exhaust data? We live on these platforms. The pandemic made us even more reliant on these platforms. Even when we have face-to-face meetings, which are not in digital space, guess what? We use digital calendars to schedule those meetings. And as a result, even for face-to-face meetings, we have some record of who was meeting with whom in that particular context. This digital exhaust data that we have comes in all sizes and shapes. Who sent a message to whom, who sent a file to whom, who badged whom, who liked whose comments, who sent an email the old-fashioned way. So these exhausts that we generate comes in very high detail and high resolution. But the social networks that we collect data on and that we know from our research is not based on these micro kinds of measurements. Instead, we ask questions like, who do you seek advice from? Who do you trust? Who do you rely on for leadership? And so the challenge is, can we take all this micro level data of who messages whom, who likes whom, who follows whom on Twitter? How do we take all these data and then combine that in some manner to tell us who is likely to look at someone else for a leadership or for advice or for trust, or just as importantly, who might be considered as a hindrance? So we all in our mind say, so-and-so is a hindrance to my work. It's a negative relationship, but it's still an important relationship to understand. So we gave the first part of the project that I will talk about today is what I refer to as on the border between network science and network science fiction. And that is, for the first time, we began to ask ourselves, is it possible that we can predict what someone will say on a network survey by simply looking at their digital trace data? And so a project that we did in collaboration with people at Fudan University and University of California, Santa Barbara, we began to collect data from a large number of organizations where we collected both survey data from the organizations and simultaneously also collected digital trace data. And the goal was to see if we could predict what people would say on a survey based upon the digital trace data. This particular study that I'm going to talk is the very first one we did, so it's a special one for me, even though it's a small sample size, and even though we have since then replicated this in other cases. But this was collected in China before the pandemic, and we collected data from 66 employees in this organization, all 66 employees in the organization, and at the same time, we also collected digital trace data from them. Our goal was to see if we could use the digital trace data to predict what they would say on a survey. What were the survey questions we asked? We asked questions like, who provides you with a sense of purpose? Who do you rely on for leadership? Who do you go to for help or advice at work? Very standard communication network questions that we ask in many cases. Then what we used was a set of new techniques in statistical modeling of networks called exponential random graph models. And we used this to be able to see how well we could predict it. Now, there's a lot of math and statistics behind this. But what I think is particularly important is that today, while we rely on things like machine learning and deep learning to make predictions, very often those deep learning models are not very transparent. They don't tell us why it is making a certain prediction. The statistical models we used here are able to make those predictions. So an example of an insight, employees, based on the data we collected, employees who send someone one message per day is 15.2% times more likely to say that that person provides them with a sense of purpose. Employees who send someone 10% more messages than they receive. So let's say they send 11 messages, but they only receive 10 messages from that person. That person is 26.7 times more likely to say that the other person provides them with a sense of purpose. What we are doing here is not only understanding, not only making predictions of what people said on a survey, but we are beginning to gain insights into why it is making that prediction. So for example, another example is that if we have situations where we say that I reply to your email in 2 hours, I'm much more likely to look to you for leadership than if I take 2 weeks to reply to your email. So you can look at all these forms of data to gain insights. The statistical models are more complicated. This is just an example of all the different factors that come into it. Each has its own interpretation. The bottom line is whether we look at this particular model that tried to predict who said who would provide them with a sense of purpose, or who do you rely on for leadership, or who do you seek advice from? In all of these cases, our models began to do a pretty good job of predicting what we would say on a survey. This example here, the accuracy in this case was 89.46%. In the case of leadership, it was 91.6%. In the case of advice, it was 78.24%. So all of a sudden, we were saying, perhaps this is not network science fiction. This is becoming network science. It's both good and bad. From a network science and a communication networks perspective, to me, this was very exciting that we don't need to be asking people survey questions. As an individual myself, this was very frightening that my digital trace data was doing such a good job of revealing what I normally would only say on a survey, but it's now made possible through this. So there are a lot of ethical issues involved with this. But the bottom line is we collected survey data in organizations in the US and China. And to answer the question, can we predict network survey responses using digital trace data? The answer is we can. So I know I'm mindful of time, and so I want to just touch on a couple of other ideas briefly in closing out here that I want to leave you with. We have to remember that the digital trace data is not simply reflecting the networks that we have. In many cases, the digital trace data and the platforms that we use to generate these digital trace data, they are changing the networks as we know it. When you have emails with people, you only have a direct connection with them. But when you use social media platforms, whether in our personal lives, we use things like Facebook or Twitter or Mastodon or LinkedIn, or in the workplace, when we use platforms like Teams and Slack, etc., or Zoom, we begin to see not only who we interact with, but who amongst our friends are interacting with each other. We see who likes whose comments. We see who makes a comment on someone else. We see who's following whom. All of these data are actually changing our view of the network. In other words, now we know more because of enterprise social media platforms like Slack and Teams. We know more about what people know and who people know. And that changes the people that we may want to network with. And those are the kinds of things that are studied in communication research with the use of what I call as technological affordances, where the technology provides an affordance that allows us to see who's associating with whom, who's connecting with whom. It allows us to see publicly how people are being evaluated. When someone puts something, not only what do I think of it, but I can see what everyone else thinks of it. When people respond to one another's questions, it raises everyone's visibility of what is possible. If I wake up in the morning here in Jakarta and I missed certain interactions that my colleagues had back in Evanston, Illinois, I'm able to go back because of the persistence and see overnight all the messages and all the back and forth conversations. And it allows us to do personalization of this particular platform. There are many more technological affordances. My goal here is to end with an important message. So far, we have focused only on technological affordances. But today, we are seeing a new form of affordance that is made possible by the data. And that's the last part of the title of my talk today. And that is what we call as algorithmic affordances in the workplace. What is algorithmic affordances and how does it differ from technological affordances? Technological affordances are when the technology makes it easy for me to see what other people are doing. Algorithmic affordances is when the algorithm is telling us who we should interact with or is telling us what we should be looking at. We see algorithmic affordances for a while when it comes to social media platforms like Facebook. Facebook and Twitter, they decide which particular posts we will see and in what order. But today, that same idea also applies in the workplace. This cartoon says, so the software, does it tell you to do things? We are seeing, for example, that just like in the dating world, we have scenarios where we can use a dating app like Tinder or Match.com or eHarmony and see once we enter a profile who we may want to talk with. Today, that same kind of algorithmic affordance, who we want to go on a date with, now that same kind of analogy is also being applied in the workplace, where we are having algorithmic affordances allow us to find who our teammates might be, who we may want to go on a date with, but not in the romantic sense, but on a work date with, who do we want to work with, etc. And so in closing here, I want to bring to your attention a couple of articles that I had the honor of co-authoring. One was published in Nature in 2021 on the left, and it was called Measuring Algorithmically Infused Societies. In the article, we talk more broadly about what does it mean to study society where humans are not acting just on the basis of their connections with other humans, but are changing their behaviors and what they might do because algorithms are telling them what to do. Just like algorithms might tell us what to look at and what movie to watch on Netflix or what products to buy on Amazon. Now algorithms in the workplace are telling us who are the people we should connect with, what are the documents we should be reading, what are the calendar events that we should be scheduling, and so on and so forth. And certainly all the recent publicity for better and for worse surrounding tools such as ChatGPT are examples of how algorithms are infusing various aspects of our life. And what I would suggest is in these articles, we talk about the fact that in addition to doing these, in addition to creating these algorithms and trying to see how we could use them, we need to be very, very reflective of the ethical issues around with it. To go back to the example that I spent some time talking about, we said that we are able to predict networks, what people's network responses would be based upon their digital trace data. The question we are left with is, just because we can, should we? What are the implications of what are the ethical implications of doing that? How do the employees benefit from it? Is it primarily something that benefits management, for example? What are the ways in which this could be empowering versus disempowering? Or are there no ways in which it can be? And these are all questions which we as communication researchers from different angles, whether it is on the one hand, looking at it from organizational communication or looking at it from other facets and other fields within communication, those of us who study technologies, for example, as well as those of us who study communication from a critical perspective. All these issues that are happening today are important areas where communication scholars need to be much more engaged in the debate because the technology is not waiting for us. And so we need to take on a leadership role around the world in trying to understand what we in the field of communication can contribute to all of these different topics. So with that, I will again stop here and thank you so much again for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nasir, for the lecture. It's quite interesting that we can use the data that we have by tracing the data. But my question is actually, it's kind of private for certain person. Then we can dig their data about how they communicate, how they send the emails, etc. That's one of the challenge. How would we take it in the research to get that kind of data? Because sometimes we need to contact with the platform provider to get this kind of data.
Yes. So the question, as I understand it, is how do we get these kinds of data? Because these are very confidential data. And I think in some ways it's good that it's difficult to get the data. As a researcher, you might say that, it'd be nice to be able to get all these data very easily, but we recognize that a lot of these data are very confidential, very sensitive. And as a result, I think that we have to balance the interests of being able to get access to data with our respect for the human rights of all of us in terms of having the right to privacy and the right to protection. What we have discovered in the work that we do is that these are the kinds of research endeavors that increasingly require us to build partnerships with organizations, with other entities on the basis of a high level of trust. And it has to be seen as something that is going to be a win-win-win scenario. And when I say win-win-win, I'm using the word win 3 times because there are at least 3 stakeholders here that are very important in this context. One of the stakeholders is selfishly the researchers. We want to get access to the data, so we would want to be able to get it. The second win, importantly, is for the organization leadership that we are discussing this with in order for us to be able to build partnerships, trustful partnerships with organizations. The organizations have to see that there are some insights that they will receive from our research that will make it a win for them. And third, but by no means the least, arguably the most important win has to be for the employees who are being observed as part of this activity. And unless we are able to create a scenario where there is this win-win-win scenario situation for all parties, I think that this research is not likely to be productive or successful. That last win is really important. And I think there's some opportunities there. Because one of the things we have done in our own work, I didn't get to talk today about the empirical work we're doing in a lot of these different contexts, but allow me to simply summarize it and say that one of the reasons we feel we have been successful in working with a variety of different types of organizations, as well as working with NASA in terms of understanding what networks emerge amongst crews that they are designing on simulated missions to go into space, something I didn't get a chance to talk about today. But in all of these cases, here is something very important that we do. We try to find ways, certainly in organizational context, we try to find ways in which we can provide each employee with a window into their own network. You know how sometimes when we are wasting time and looking at different magazines, we come across these sort of pop quizzes that tell us something about ourselves, whether it's from Cosmopolitan magazine or something along those lines. Think about what happens in the area of networks. Almost no one has seen a survey where they are told, by the way, we've got this data about you, and we're going to tell you that based on your network, how good you are to come up with ideas. Think about the structural signatures, the ideation score. How good are you likely to be at coming up with influencers, being an influencer? So what we do is we take people's networks and provide each individual with a customized, completely confidential personal report that helps them benefit from learning more about their own networks because they may never have seen it. We've all done surveys and quizzes that tell us about our personality. Are we extroverts? Are we introverts? Are we conscientious? But almost none of us has ever participated in a study that will allow us to know how good our networks are and what we are able to do as a result of the strengths that we have in our networks. We think that providing each employee with those kinds of customized confidential reports will go a long way in increasing their willingness to be a part of this, for them to see value in these kinds of studies. And that's why that third win is so important.
Thank you, Professor. Please have a seat. They will have a discussion with the audience.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sure that everyone has already have a lot of questions to us. But before we start the Q&A question, I would like to also invite Professor Doreen to be on stage, because the Q&A session is not only based on the lecture, but also about ICA in general, ICA globally, and also ICA Indonesia. So for the team, would you please provide one more chair for Professor Doreen to joining us here? So everyone here, please feel free to ask about the lecture, about the network, for the digital trace, but also ask about ICA in general, how to be the part of ICA, what's actually the benefit, even though Professor Nasir already explained it previously, but maybe we need to discuss further actually. Yeah, sure. For the participant who's joining online, you may also ask some question. You may leave it on the chat. Then maybe we will answer the question. Okay, so we will start from our friends here first. Anyone who has any question, you may ask directly. Anything? Okay.
If there is no one who will, oh yeah, so Ibu Melati, you can go first.
I'm going second after you.
Okay, my question is actually when we do a social analysis research, how can you make sure, or how do you see that the quality of the data is good? Thank you.
So that's a very, very, very important question. And I'm so glad that you asked that question. I will actually pick up on answering that question exactly where I left off answering the first question. And that is, one of the things that we have to recognize is that just because big data gives us a lot of data, that doesn't make it better data. And that digital trace data is notorious for being extremely noisy. And we have to recognize that even though our predictions were pretty decent, we have to be cautious about the quality of the data, as you said. There are two or three ways in which we have addressed that issue, or we suggest addressing that issue. I wouldn't say we've been successful, but we've made improvements. The first is, recall in answering the first question, I said we provide a customized report to each person. One of the benefits of doing that is we give each person a window into the network that we believe they have. Each of them has the opportunity to turn back at us and says, sorry, I don't recognize that network. And that's one way in which we can do quality control. The metaphor that we use is in the United States, and I suspect in other parts of the world, we have certain agencies that are charged with giving us assessments of our financial credit status. So in the US, for example, when I want to go buy a car or a house or another expensive item, the person who is providing us with a loan will want to see our credit standing. That is to see how good and how reliable we are in terms of making sure that we will pay back loans, to put it very simplistically. So there are companies that actually provide us scores. Now, the nice thing is we can go into the company and take a look at our score and see how well we are, how good, how fiscally responsible we are. Every now and then we might find that the company will come back and say, oh, your credit score is terrible. And we will scratch our heads and wonder, why is that the case? I don't think that I did anything wrong. Well, you didn't do anything wrong, but somebody else did. They were using your name and your account to make purchases for which they didn't pay anything. And so your credit rating came down because of no fault of yours. But the important issue here is that you had access to your credit score and you had the ability to know when something was wrong and you could raise it with the company. Likewise, if I give you a picture of your network and you go, this is not my network, then you have the ability to improve the quality of it because of that. Now, why can that happen? There are several technological reasons why big data can be noisy. One is we know situations where sometimes an account is not, a person might have two different email accounts or two different social media accounts, right? We just saw up here a few minutes ago that ICA Indonesia chapter has its own Twitter account, right? And based here in Indonesia. Now, interestingly, it's possible that more than one person is going to use that account to post things. So you have these scenarios where there is no one-on-one match between a person and an account. Sometimes you have an account used by multiple people. Sometimes you have a person having multiple accounts. And as a result, that can create some noise in the quality of data. Another scenario that we have encountered a lot in the workplace is people use multiple platforms. So not everything that we are doing may be on Slack or on WhatsApp or on WeChat. And in fact, in the studies that we did, we found people who told us afterwards, they said, yeah, you only studied what we did on this official platform. But to be honest with you, when we have to discuss something very private and sensitive, we will use the WeChat platform. We will not use the official government platform or the official organizational platform. Okay, that means we create noise in the data. And as communication researchers, we have become very interested in understanding how our behaviors on multiple platforms can be studied together, whether it is in the public space, things like Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Snapchat, or Twitter and Mastodon, or whether it's in the organizational context. All of these are advances that are happening that we take advantage of, but will have an impact on the quality of data.
Thank you, Professor Ibu Melati. Please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Noshir
Noshir.
Contractor. Usually we said Mr. Contractor, but in Indonesia, contractor meaning some project in building or something. So it's not common, but thank you for coming to Jakarta. Okay. My question similar with what Prof. Doreen or asked about your presentation. It's about the quality of accepting the data or not accepting. But in spite of that question, I have another question about how this research could be implemented in ICA membership. I mean, how you use the member to make something internationally and for Professor Doreen nationally. Thank you very much.
Good. That's a very good question. I like how you tied it in and brought us right back to the ICA Indonesia chapter in particular. There are different organizations that are looking at ways in which we can harness this within a certain context. I think that your idea of trying to use some of these techniques, especially within the context of ICA Indonesia, is a brilliant idea for many reasons. One is because from an intellectual standpoint, one of the things that many individuals around the world may not realize is what a vast country Indonesia is. The fact that you have 3 time zones is really important, and many people around the world don't have an appreciation of how vast the country is. When you have a situation like this, the world doesn't revolve around Jakarta. Sorry for those of you who are from Jakarta. There are many other parts of Indonesia where people are studying communication, are interested in being part of the ICA Indonesia community. When you have something so distributed, creating tools that allow people to build better networks, to understand who knows who and who knows what, becomes much more important in this case. So I think intellectually, you certainly have the opportunity of trying to use the kinds of platforms you've talked about to just help get networks. I'll give you a scenario. Imagine that there is a student in Sumatra who is interested in working on a particular topic, but the professors at their own universities who are very experts in certain areas may not be an expert in that particular area. But what happens is they say, oh, if a tool like this existed where people could go type in and say, I'm interested in topic X, and then they find that there is a professor who's working in that topic, say at Atmajaya University, and they are able to then reach out. They may say, well, you know, I can contact Prof. Dorian, but I may never get a reply back from her. But if the professor, that if you find out not only that Prof. Dorian is an expert in that topic, but that you also then discover through looking at these networks that your colleague, your professor at your university is actually very good friends with Prof. Dorian, then you have a better chance of making those kinds of introductions. So I think that platforms like this, when implemented within organizations such as the ICA Indonesia chapter, would be very helpful in helping building community, building networks, making it less difficult for you to be able to reach out to somebody who you may not be directly connected with, but who you are connected through somebody else, what we call degrees of separation. Now, the second reason why I think your idea is very good is not an intellectual reason, but a logistical reason. And by that, I mean, these kinds of platforms can get very unwieldy very quickly. But if you were to, instead of thinking of implementing it entirely for ICA worldwide, if you were to try to implement this just locally within the Indonesia chapter, for example, that makes it technologically much more feasible, because we're not talking about 8,000 members. We're talking about a smaller number of individuals where the network can be used to be able to build better connections. So it's a lot easier to use these kinds of techniques and do it on a much smaller scale, where it's building community amongst a group of people, many of whom might be directly or indirectly connected to one another through maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation. So I like this idea a lot, and I'll certainly be willing to help. It's a way of marrying my interests in helping ICA with my research interests and the research interests of many of you in building better communication networks. So I like this idea, and I'd love to chat more with you about it.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Here's a question from our participant from Zoom. I will read it for you. My name is Kirana. I have a bachelor degree in communication from University of Indonesia, and I'm going to do a master's in digital development at the University of Manchester. Professor Rosier's presentation is very relevant to my studies. My question is, can we use people analytics and positive defiance? Positive defiance is the outliers, people who outperform their peers. I'm just curious if we can use people analytics and positive defiance to scale the results. Thank you. That's the question.
No, that's a very good question. And thank you so much, Krana, for joining and asking that really wonderful question. I think one of the things that networks allow us to do is to begin to understand how certain kinds of attitudes or behaviors, in this case, positive deviant outlier, that is somebody who's performing much better than others, how can we use the networks to be able to scale their better practices to larger parts of the network. And in fact, there are a lot of people who study social networks that focus on this particular issue, whether it is positive deviance or whether it is influencers, when people who are looking at marketing, for example, all of them are interested in, is there a way in which we can identify who are the key influencers in a particular circle? And very often the person whose views you want to spread may not themselves be the key influencer. And so part of what networks allow us to do is to see if there are ways in which we can connect the people who might be the positive deviation, who are the positive deviants, who are very good. But because they may not have the networks, they may not be themselves in the best position to spread that word. But pairing them with people who are considered as influencers might be a good way to do that. I'll give you an example. Malcolm Gladwell, who is a very popular author and wrote the book called The Tipping Point, he said that if you want to see how ideas spread in society, you need to recognize that there are three kinds of people that are required in the network in order to spread ideas, whether it's a positive deviance idea or a particular marketing product, or it could also be a pro-social behavior like family planning, for example. And in all of these areas, you have some people that he said who are the mavens. You could think of them as the positive deviants. These are people who are experts who come up with great ideas. But these are not people who have very many networks. These are people who specialize and spend all their time sitting in one cubbyhole and becoming experts on a particular topic. But in order for those ideas to spread, you need to make sure that those mavens have in their small networks are connected to people we call connectors. So connectors are people who are not like mavens. They don't spend a lot of time learning deep expertise on a topic. But what they do is they connect to a lot of different people. So they find out about new ideas from a lot of different people. And what is interesting is that in society, as you look at it, some people tend to be mavens, some people tend to be connectors. And then there are some third category of people who are what we would call salesmen, or what Malcolm Gladwell calls salesmen. So mavens, connectors, and salespeople. Salespeople are not the ones who come up with ideas. Those are the mavens. They're not the ones who connect to a lot of people to find out about other people's ideas. But what they are is that they are the people who know how to sell an idea. And so in order for positive deviance, to go back to your question, Prana, what you need the positive deviance is the person who's the maven. But what you need to do to propagate that idea to others is to make sure that that idea is captured by somebody who's a connector and then is evangelized or popularized by somebody who's a salesperson, who is able to take that idea and say, look, we all need to do what this person is doing. And at least from Malcolm Gladwell's work, that ecosystem of having mavens, connectors, and salespeople are all required in order for an idea that comes from a positive deviance outlier to be spread across the entire.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Okay, for the next question.
Thank you, Professor Contractor, for your elaboration of your fantastic research. One of the questions that you raised for your research is, whom do you contact if you need advice? It's a very intriguing question, especially today when we are in digital X house, which include nowadays or currently the ChatGPT. What do you think of this phenomena? Thank you. By the way, my name is Nani Setiadi. I'm from Pelita Harapan University, Jakarta. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for that very important question and very relevant question at this time. I think that for those, I suspect everyone out here knows about ChatGPT, or more generally, large language models, and even more generally, what we call as generative AI. That is AI that generates conversations, generates text, generates artwork, generates music, and all of this comes under the broader category of generative AI. And we are seeing a lot more of that happening recently. And importantly, perhaps less publicized, is it's not happening a lot more. But what has happened is that many of these models and generative AI have been made available to the general public through APIs. And that's what makes it like much more scalable and makes it possible so that even when you put something into a search engine like Bing or BART, in the case of Google, you're able to get results which are generated by the text. I think that I wrote a column as a presidential column for the International Communication Association last month, where I focused on the role of ChatGPT in terms of research and teaching. Certainly, advice is an important component in both research and teaching. And one of the things that I was reminded of as I've been thinking about this latest set of technologies is we've had technologies previously that did things that we thought only humans were able to do. And our initial reaction was one of two extremes. One reaction was, oh my God, if we were to use a calculator, I'm old enough to know that when I was in school, we first introduced the calculator, the personal calculator. And we were not allowed to use that in the classroom because they said, oh, if you use a calculator, that means we will ruin our ability to do any calculations as humans. And so it was cast as the devil incarnate, to be prohibited and banned from all situations. Today, we realize that, yes, there are things that a calculator can do that we don't do, or whether it's a statistical program that does things that we can't do. That only means that we have more time to now create a higher level of intellect, with time on more higher level intellectual questions. So one extreme is people who say we have to remove ChatGPT from the classroom. In fact, in many circles, and you may be familiar with this yourself, there is a robust debate where some people are saying we should ban GPT from the classroom. And now people are saying, well, no, we can't, if you can't beat them, join them and make it part of it. Not that long ago, we had the same conversation about Wikipedia that you may remember, where people were wondering whether Wikipedia was the friend or the enemy of a teacher, right, in terms of things. Now, at the other end of the extreme, there is also the point of view that ChatGPT is very problematic because it gives misleading answers, it gives you fake facts, it pretends like it, quote unquote, knows things when it actually doesn't know anything. It's just taking text and being able to repurpose it. All of that is very true, and therefore we have to be skeptical about what we get from ChatGPT. So as much as we have to be skeptical on what we get from Wikipedia, and in some cases, we can also see that even old-fashioned statistical tools and programs that we are now using may also give us what we call garbage in, garbage out. So we have to balance the benefits that we might be able to get with each new generation of technology, including generative AI, pardon the pun, but also recognize that they all have their limitations. In terms of advice, one of the things I did in the column, and I'll be happy to make available a link to the column I did, I asked ChatGPT, what kind of research should we be doing in the field of communication about ChatGPT? I asked ChatGPT that question. And interestingly, the first response it gave me was, we could be doing research, you should be doing research on how ChatGPT affects the authenticity of communication. I thought that was really quite interesting because some of you may know this, but the conference theme for ICA 2023 that was selected by my good friend and President-elect Unju Lee was authenticity in communication. So it is almost as if ChatGPT was suggesting that the most important area of research for ChatGPT in the field of communication is the very conference theme that we have chosen this year for our ICA conference. And so then I asked the next question. I said, well, what kinds of hypotheses do you suggest we test about how ChatGPT might impact the authenticity of the communication? And I'll let you go look at the article, but it laid out 4 hypotheses that it said, this is how authenticity will affect communication. And then I asked it a further question. I said, you're giving me these hypotheses, but if you were a student I would ask you to tell me the rationale, the mechanisms for why you think these hypotheses are true. And lo and behold, it gave me mechanisms. Give me 4 mechanisms for why those particular, why ChatGPT would impact authenticity in certain ways. And I went one step further and I said, well, but these hypotheses are general hypotheses. Can you tell me if there are moderating influences where the impact of ChatGPT on authenticity might be higher in certain groups than in other groups? And by golly, it came back to me in seconds with moderating variables about this, including the fact that one of them was relevant here because it said in certain parts of the world in the global south where people may not have access to certain technologies of familiarity, the effect of ChatGPT might be more or less depending upon the cultural differences that we have related to authenticity. Now, I think that a lot of what I saw out there was potentially better than the first draft that I would get in about 3 minutes from a graduate student on that topic. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that it was probably more than what I myself would come up with in 3 minutes. Does that make it right? No, but now you can say that has now, at least if nothing else, stimulated new ideas. The very fact that something like that was spit out to me so quickly gives me an opportunity to use that as a starting point for discussion. Do I believe it? Not necessarily, but it has provided me with an incredible priming of the intellectual pump that allows me now to stake those ideas, to dwell on it, to agree or disagree, to refine or refute. But all of those things are now benefiting by the advice that I got from ChatGPT in this particular case. I think that those are tools that we, not just in the field of communication, but across education, might want to consider as we look into the future. Again, the important thing is not to believe it, not to assume that that's what it is, but it's one more contribution, one more quiver, one more arrow in the quiver as we go about trying to explore research questions in our field.
Thank you. And that will be an interesting topic for ICA, for communication scholars, particularly the Indonesian chapter.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
very
you,
much.
Danny. Thank you, Professor. So because we have a very limited time, so I want to ask question both for Professor Nelson and Professor Doreen. Actually, there are lots of our friends joining online, and they're not quite familiar with ICA. So I'd like to know why we need to join the ICA as a practitioner, as an academician, or maybe a student, why we need to join the ICA, especially ICA Indonesia chapter, and how. And is there any membership fee or etc.? Maybe you can explain that. Okay, thank you.
I'll give some opening remarks, but I really think that that's a question that the ICA Indonesia chapter should be able to address. So certainly I'm very happy to hear that many of you are interested in this. I can tell you that when I was a graduate student, when I first joined ICA, I was very, very intimidated to go to a conference. I was very scared about it. And my first conference, I think, was in 1985, when the ICA was held in Hawaii, in Honolulu. And I was so scared, I stayed in my room the entire time because I didn't know what to do, because there were all these major scholars that I had never met, but I knew of them. I was very intimidated by them. The nice thing about ICA as a culture is it's extremely friendly. And I like to say that people go to ICA for the intellectual scholarship, but they stay with ICA for the comfort, the company, the support, the social support that we as a family have. And I think that you have an opportunity to create a microcosm of that within the context of ICA Indonesia, without feeling the need as a student who's at the first, a student or a junior researcher, without going into the whole ICA, you get a window of what it's like to be part of a community of researchers. I like to say that one of the things ICA taught me was everything I didn't learn in the class. So we learn a lot about communication in our classes, in our courses, but there's a lot about our field that we don't learn in the classes. How do we look for jobs? What are the kinds of jobs? How do we prepare ourselves for careers? How do we decide whether to go to graduate school? How do I deal with the fact that I belong to a minority of some kind? And I'm trying to understand how to negotiate that within a larger field that doesn't look like me or doesn't think like me, or doesn't know enough about how I feel and how I think about issues. So that's the value of being part of a community. And I'm hoping that what the ICA Indonesia chapter would do would give many of you in Indonesia that may not have the resources to be able to be a part of the entire ICA community, an opportunity to feel that there is a home for you at ICA, more specifically, a home for you at the ICA Indonesia chapter. Now, there are more details that Dorian can tell you about how many of you would like to be a part of this group.
Thank you for the questions. Actually, there is one more questions. Yeah, I think we can discuss it after. So actually, everything is already explained by Prof. Nosir in his speech in the opening speech. However, I would like to go more details on this ICA Indonesia chapter, especially on the membership. Yes, there is a small fee because it's compulsory for us to set up a small fee for all members. And there are 4 levels of membership. The first is students, and then postgrad students, and lecturer, and professional. We will have the on the screen later on, yeah, about the amount, because I'm not quite remember the amount of the fee and what will you get with this small fee. You will get many things. Oh yeah, okay, so yeah, it's only small amount of fee for undergraduate student 120, and then graduate student 240, and faculty in individual 360, and institutional for 3% only 1 million, and professional 500. That's for 1 year. Yeah, so a month you only pay for 10,000 rupiah. So it's less than $1 actually, Prof. Yeah, and what you get again, you will get lots of things about communication world. As Prof. Nosir mentioned, you can develop your ability, competencies, and communications, research, and especially networking and building your profile. So when Prof do the people analytic, you will have a good profile with good networking, and that can develop your career in the future, believe me, because that's my experience. I met Prof. Eng in Seoul, and we discussed, and then Prof. Eng come to Indonesia. That time, he was the president of ICA. Then I met Prof. Terry Flu in Beijing, in Tsinghua University, and we have discussion, and a lot of things we discuss, positive, negative, what's happened in the world. And then he came to Indonesia. And I have a discussion with Prof. Nosir online, just online. We never met in person before. I saw him in Washington when we celebrating Prof. Monji birthday, but I just saw him from far away. That's Prof. Nosir. I read his book and everything, but I cannot go closer to him because so many people. However, because of this digital, because of Prof. Terry Flu and Prof. Eng and other members, also the director, executive director, Laura Sawyer, Prof. Nosir is in front of us. You know what I mean? That's the beauty of networking. So come and join the ICA of Indonesia chapter, and we will build the network together and grow up together. And the most important thing is not only bring the ICA headquarters or ICA Global to Indonesia, to the region, but we should come up with the voice of Indonesia. So a lot of academician, communication academician all over the world will listen to our voice, and we can contribute to the global communications. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Doreen. Do we still have some time for the last question? Okay, so we will go back to the chat. I will read the question. Okay. Good morning, Prof. I'm Fieri, third year communication student of Atmajaya University. Thank you for your great presentation. I wonder about how digital tracing in Indonesia, especially. We know Indonesian government had a lot of conflicts with some of social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, etc. We also know that until now, there aren't any rules or laws that cover digital well-being and privacy of Indonesian people. Considering that a lot of social media companies are unreachable because their offices weren't based in Indonesia, how should we respond to the situation as digital communication or as ICA Indonesian chapter today?
So again, thank you so much for that very, very thoughtful and somewhat depressing question, which is an important issue that we all have to raise. And so I'm glad that you raised this issue. I'm going to tie this back actually to some of what ICA Indonesia chapter can do. One of the things that you can do as an organization, again, as I said, these are all options that you get to explore. But one of the things that has been done in many cases is associations might decide to write, to collectively do a white paper on a particular topic to help educate people about it. And so in many instances, even now, I see white papers that are being written on different topics of relevance that you can then say, we've produced this white paper, it's an analytics piece, it could be a position paper. And I know that many of the senior scholars who are part of the ICA Indonesia chapter are listened to and are serve as guide advisors to many important decision makers in the country. And so you have an opportunity to be able to do those kinds of things, to raise these concerns and issues. Another point that, another way in which you could also contribute to these areas is by creating campaigns. Not that long ago, there were a group of researchers around the world who asked to do a signature campaign in support of certain kinds of changes in regulations around the use of APIs being made available by social media platforms like Twitter. And you again have an opportunity to mobilize action, to organize, to be able to see what are common interests and concerns that membership, communication scholars, communication researchers within the Indonesian context will have. Because exactly as your point here describes, Very, ICA, being a global organization, is very limited in how much it can take on causes that might be applied to certain regions around the world. But ICA Indonesia has the ability and the power and the mandate to do exactly that. If you decide that this is something that you would like to consider, that you would like to focus on, that it affects you as a community within the Indonesian context, then ICA Indonesia is an entity that you might be able to use to galvanize, to mobilize support, to be able to come up with a certain opinion that you want to share with your fellow citizens in the country. So these are exactly the kinds of issues that could be very well served by the creation of ICA Indonesia and giving you a collective voice and ability to mobilize on certain issues that you think are important.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Okay, that's going to be our last question. So thank you everyone for joining the general lecture today. We understand that our world is getting smaller and smaller. That is why we need to know each other and build our profile correctly digitally, because everyone knows everyone at the moment. Everyone can contact anyone at the moment. That's what Professor Nasir said. We need to be smarter than them on the technology and the digital and how we use it and to overcome our challenges and developing our studies and the communications. So thank you for today. I'll give it back to the MC. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Doreen. We can leave the stage at the moment now. Thank you.
Thank you for being such a great moderator. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much, Professor Noshir and Professor Doreen Kartikawangi for great insight and Mr. Avianto for drive well. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to announce about membership ICA Indonesia. As you can see in the screen. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to follow ICA social media. The name is official.f.ica.id for further information and membership. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we fill in the information link to get certificate for participant in the Zoom, link or share in the chat Zoom, and participant on site. You can write down the link as you can see in the screen. Okay, the link is in the screen. I will give 1 until 3 minutes to fill in. Welcome all participants. Ladies and gentlemen, now I want to inform about after this event, there will be lunch at floor 14. You can go there. And now we close the kick-off event. Thank you, and thank you very much. And before we part, please accept this prayer from me. Kalau ada jaring patah, jangan disimpan karena bahaya. Kalau ada silap dan salah harap sudi maafkan saya. Which wrong, please forgive me for our shortcomings. Feel the good, perhaps in the next kick-off event. May all safe a journey. Bye. See you next time.